Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Chris Jennings.
Joining us once again today is Karl Gunzer, the director of the sporting dog group for Purina Pro Plan. Karl, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be here. How are you today?
I am awesome. It's always great to have you on. Just, you have such a wealth of knowledge of not only the Ducks Unlimited and Purina partnership, but also, 25 years of field trial dog training experience that you bring to the show. And, even before we got on air, I was kind of asking some random questions just to get this rolling. And it's just, it's just exciting for me that I can pretty much ask anything up and down the board from as far as training, field trials, hunt tests, nutrition, and you can knock it out of the park. So we'll go ahead and start this off with the DU Purina partnership, because it's so important for Ducks Unlimited. It's just such a great partnership that we've had for several years. And I just wanted you to provide everyone with kind of an update and a little overview of how that partnership is going and how it's beneficial for both.
Yeah. Well, it's near and dear to our hearts for sure. And, we just finished up with the Ducks Unlimited Expo, the DU Expo, and, we were the presenting sponsor of that. And that's such a fun time to really get to engage with your members and visit with people in person. So often it's hard to reach all the members, and you try to do stuff in the magazines and advertising and all that, but really getting to events, seeing people is really fun. It's a good time to engage with the members. We'd love to support every DU banquet out there, but you guys have so many of them, it's impossible to reach all the members. But we try and support the state conventions. That's a lot of your key volunteers are at that. We generally do something at the annual DU convention. I think that's coming up in a couple months in New Orleans. So we're since 2015. Purina Pro Plan has been a proud partner. That's kind of our corporate partnership. It starts with a corporate donation every year, but then we really like supporting DU's conservation mission too. I think Purina is a big company, and we have to source our ingredients responsibly and sustainably. So we've partnered with DU on some great initiatives like the Rice Stewardship Partnership, the Living Lakes initiatives in Minnesota and Iowa. So it's really a great partnership across many levels.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, we kind of, we have that information in the magazine and we promote it online and things like that. But the information about how you guys are actually, not only involved where people see you like at the expo and at, in the magazine and a part of DUTV and things like that, but also, you guys are actually supporting, that dirt work and within some of these conservation initiatives. And I think that's sometimes people miss that. Some people in our audience may just not really recognize how important, partnerships like this are as far as actually putting habitat on the ground through our wetlands conservation efforts. So I know everyone around here definitely applauds Purina for that support, and it's just such a beneficial relationship for everyone.
Yeah, we feel the same way. Like ducks, we like rice. We use rice in a lot of our formulas, and rice is good duck habitat, and making sure those initiatives and practices are sustainable and benefit everyone is really important.
Well, that kind of just leads us perfectly into recently. You guys launched the actual Pro Plan Ducks Unlimited branded products. Can we go ahead and just kind of run through a list of those?
Yeah, it was pretty fun. So, our Sport 3020, that's kind of the staple in our Pro Plan line that most hunters, competitors, trainers feed. It's a higher protein and fat. It promotes endurance and lean muscle mass, just kind of good for active dogs. And we came out with 3 different novel protein formulas that we put the DU logo on. So one was a beef and bison, salmon and cod, and then the fun one, the turkey, duck, and quail or turducken formula. But they're very similar nutriently to the regular Sport 3020. But we find a lot of people. Some dogs go through their life and they're happy eating Sport 3020 chicken their whole life, and they could care less. Others, they like a change. They like something different, just kind of like owners, and so having these varieties gives a little different taste, different flavor, some novel proteins. Maybe if a dog has an allergy to something, they can try one of these novel protein formulas. But the main thing is it's similar to our Sport 30/20 as far as the amount of calories and the way the dogs will do on it.
No, I mean, I just had a personal story just thinking about that when you said it. We went on an RV trip recently, and I left our dog food at home, and so I had to go and buy dog food on the road, and I switched to it's a lamb and rice Pro Plan for an adult dogs. My dog's 13. She hasn't hunted in 2 years. She can barely walk. She's just, and so I switched to that. And all it was a switch of the flavor. Just they didn't have, I think she was on a chicken or maybe, I don't know which one it was. I can't remember. But then we switched to this lamb and rice meal for adult dogs. And man, she's just like reinvigorated herself, I guess, as far as eating. I think maybe just changing it up a little bit, like you'd mentioned there, like just changing up that formula just a little bit has really got her a little pep in her step right now, so it's good to see.
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of dogs kind of appreciate the change. I think sometimes I never thought about it much when I was training. You had a bunch of dogs, you just wanted to feed the same thing. You didn't want to take a chance, try something different. You just wanted to do the same thing every day. But yeah, I think they probably do get a little bit bored once in a while with the same taste, same flavor. And like I said, they're close enough in formulations. I'd probably still transition over a few days, but honestly, with the same, protein and fat levels, odds are you could switch with no interruption, no upset or anything.
Yeah.
Fun fact, the dog on the bag, the DU bag is a Wild Rose dog named Gamble. I think.
Really?
Yeah. So Wild Rose used to have, Deke and Drake were the DU dogs and all that, and that's Gamble is on the bag. He's really a beautiful dog.
I wonder if Gamble could potentially be a descendant of Deke.
He might be, yeah.
There was a few around that. Deke's probably a little old for that, but that looks like a younger dog on there. Deke might be a little too old for that kind of action.
Legend is the latest, youngest one. I think he's Deke's son is Legend. So I think there was Drake and then Deke and now Legend. So the Wild Rose DU dog history.
Yeah, that's awesome. We'll have to get Mike Stewart on here to talk about that. And that's, when talking about changing dog foods, that always, reminds me when we had Mike on here and he's talking about changing anything whatsoever. He's a big proponent, kind of like you. As a field trial guy, you're feeding them the same thing because you're feeding so many dogs. But also he's very conscious of the way that people do change dog foods. And, that transition period is important. And that's, one thing that shocked me when I changed my dog's food, that those formulas must have been so close enough that, man, it was just really kind of a flavor deal for her and it didn't have any impact whatsoever. So that was kind of cool. I was happy to see that.
It generally doesn't, if you stay within like Pro Plan or something, but I'd hate to say that it never does. And then somebody switches and, their dog is just super sensitive and it upsets them or something. But
then you'll get a nasty email from someone,
a listener
of the DU podcast. So, let's transition here a little bit to, your history as a field trial trainer. And I know we've done it since the last time you were on. We kind of did the same thing, but kind of to toot your horn. Can you give us a little background of your history as a field trial? I know you've trained some really, really great dogs, but just kind of give our listeners, just in case we've got some new people listening, just your kind of background as a trainer.
Yeah, sure. So I trained field trial dogs for a little over 20 years. And, I learned from some great trainers. And I think that's really important if people are like wanting to start training or get into training, and it's kind of like a mentorship. And I think, a lot of people start and they kind of do it themselves the whole time. I was really fortunate to start off training with a guy named Jim Dobbs from California. He worked for, Tritronics for a long time. He wrote the Tritronics book on retriever training. And I worked for Jim for 3 years, learned a lot, went on my own left, started my own business. And after about 3 years on my own, I realized, I still had more to learn. And I went back to work for a guy named Don Romaine in Montana. And Don really helped, kind of take my training to the next level. Don was a successful, all-age field trial trainer. He's the one that, he didn't win actually, Lean Mac didn't win the National Open. Lean Mac, who's a pretty famous dog, won the national amateur when Don was still training him before he went to Mike Lardian. So Don was he was a great, very accomplished trainer and a super mentor. He's probably one of the best coaches I ever had, like a tough coach, but a good coach. So I worked for Don for 3 years and then went on my own a second time. And I had my own business for, I think, about 12 years before coming to Purina. But yeah, I kind of did the field trial thing. I was in Montana in the summer, Texas in the winter, and kind of back and forth in between, which is right now where all those guys are. This is the time of year, April, May, where all the trainers are in the middle of their move. This weekend, the River King field trial is going on just outside of St. Louis. And, the guys that live in the South, they're going north for the summer. And the guys that, live up north are going home. So it's a big transition time. And it's that time, we're just a few weeks away from the National Amateur. It starts in mid-June. So a lot of people are trying to get dogs qualified for the National Amateur. This is definitely peak field trial season if there ever was one right now.
Yeah. You mentioned that move, how these guys are moving with all of these dogs. How many dogs were you moving when you would go from Texas to Montana? Like, how many dogs were you traveling with?
Yeah, it depended. For a few years I had an assistant. And when we had an assistant, so it was my wife and myself and an assistant, we'd have around 35 or 36 dogs. If it was just my wife and I, it was typically 24 dogs. And that would be a broad range. You'd have everything from a 6-month-old dog kind of doing what we'd call basics, kind of learning all of the fundamentals of the work, to, all age competitors, to, 8, 9-year-old dogs. Some dogs stay with pros year round, but a lot of dogs will, if the owner lives up north, they might send the dog south for the winter. And so the dog gets trained and competed in the winter in the southern states, or vice versa. If a dog owner lives in Texas, well, they might want to send their dog to Montana for the summer. So the dog is trained when it's too hot in Texas. So yeah, it's kind of dogs move all across the country.
Now is, just kind of staying on that travel aspect, because I'm always interested in that, because luckily I've always had dogs who traveled well. But I've had some buddies who have had some dogs who do not travel well. They get anxiety, weird things, they start acting a little different. Something's weird about that. How much is that kind of traveling a really part of the training for a field trial dog?
Well, Chris, that's a great thing to talk about. So I had one dog that was really, really nice. She was a super dog, and I think could have been a field trial champion. She got a second, as a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, like fairly young. She trained really nice. Little dog from Montana named Sage. Anyway, she was a terrible traveler, and I figured it out. A lot of time you drive to the field trial the night before, get settled in, and then run the field trial the next day. And one day there was a trial in Butte, which is about 2 hours from Ronan, and I decided to go over the morning of. And I got there and let the dogs off the truck to, do a little airing before the trial started. And Sage was just wiped out. She was absolutely wore out. And we wondered why she was losing a little hair on the side of her head and things like that. Well, she traveled so poorly, she would spin in the crate and she would just beat herself up. And it was really unfortunate. We would let her ride in the back of the truck, in our laps. We tried medicating her with different acepromazine, different things, it's really unfortunate. But so I think it's a great thing for people to teach their dog young. And I really encourage anybody that has a young dog or a puppy, A, is crate train it, and B is travel train it. Put it in a crate, take it for a drive around the block, and then stop. Don't make its first road trip,
12-hour grind
miles if you can afford it. Yeah. Or, probably like kids, I guess. But yeah, it's really important that they learn to ride. And I guess like some people that get car sick, some dogs just have a terrible time. And we did have dogs that, went on to have a career with us that never traveled well. They basically got car sick or truck sick. You'd stop, every couple hours and let them out. And they would ultimately get diarrhea most of the trips, so you'd instead of the normal dogs that you can let out every, I typically about every time you get gas, you'd let the dogs out. And some of these dogs that didn't travel well, you'd have to do it every hour or two, is stop and let them out real quick and make sure they were doing okay. So yeah, it's a real thing.
Yeah. I'm not as familiar with the field trial and that whole process, but it just made me think, man, traveling can be tough on these dogs, and that's actually a really easy, and I didn't intend for it to go this way, but Purina has some calming care products that. If you can talk about those a little bit, that I know Mike Stewart mentioned that he uses some different products to with a couple of his dogs when he's traveling long distances, and kind of starts them on that a little bit early, maybe a couple days before the trip. Can you kind of talk about some of those?
Sure. So Calm & Care kind of came out after I was done my career as a field trial pro, but the first product that I became familiar with was called Portaflora, and it's a probiotic that just helps. I don't know exactly how it works or what it does, but I can tell you it's beneficial bacteria and it improves gut health. And so really, for me, it reduces diarrhea and stress diarrhea and that type of thing. When I would do the trip from Montana to Texas every year, so it's a 2,000-mile drive, and we'd do it in about 3.5 days, ultimately you'd always have a few dogs get sick and get diarrhea on the trip. And when Portaflora came out, I started using it a couple days before the trip and would keep the dogs on it for the drive, and then, a day or two. So they would be on Portaflora for about a week. And I'll tell you, it really helped them travel. I had fewer dogs that would get sick. They would eat their food, because a lot of dogs, once you get traveling, might not want to eat as well. And, because travel is not restful for a dog. I mean, the whole process is stressful, bouncing down the road and all that. It's probably a little better in the backseat of a car, but, when you're in a dog truck or the back of a pickup truck, something like that, it's harder on them. So I really found that the Portaflora helped. I had fewer dogs sick or get diarrhea on the trip. Calm & Care is really one that needs to be given all the time to help reduce anxiety in dogs. And it is also a probiotic, and it kind of functions on the gut-brain axis. There's a nerve that actually goes from the gut to the brain, and it really helps. Results vary in different dogs, and it depends on the behavior, but it's not going to cure a gun-shy dog. But dogs that get upset about thunderstorms, there's lots of instances that people put their dogs on Calm & Care, and they notice the dog was, less affected by thunderstorms, less anxious, just fewer of those anxiety-ridden behaviors, being home alone, left in a kennel, all those kind of things. So it's not a drug, which is the good thing. It doesn't reduce the dog's alertness. So like if you're competing with a dog, it's not going to affect the dog like if you were to put them on an anti-anxiety drug that affects, their brain function. This doesn't do that. So it's definitely worth trying if you have a dog that, is thunderphobic or hyper or, separation anxiety, those types of things.
I mean, there's a lot of dog owners out there who face a lot of those issues, and just for them to know that there's something out there to help them, may really, be eye-opening for some people out there.
Yep.
As far as, just field trials in general, and I don't want to get too much, or field trial training. I don't want to get too in the weeds, because I know we could probably get super, in the weeds with this, but, just for someone, I guess this question is probably, the answer is probably for someone who may be thinking about, man, I think I'm going to take the next step and I want to get into being, a field trial trainer. What would you say are really like the basic fundamentals that someone should know before they try and kick off a career as a field trial trainer?
Wow, that's a good question. So, there's different levels or different competitions, I should say, in different areas where professionals can focus. So you have some professionals that focus on gun dogs, and that's their niche, that's their focus, that's what they do. That's really nice in that you can pretty much stay at home with that career. You don't have to travel too much. There's some gun dog trainers that'll take a trip in the summer or winter, depending on whether they're in northern or, where they live. But in most standard gun dog training, even if it's hot, you can work the dogs on short things. There's things you can do to mitigate heat. Even if it's cold, you can do quick sessions or work inside. So there's ways as a gun dog trainer that you can live in one location. If you run hunt tests, there's fewer of them in the south in the summer and fewer in the north in the winter. But you could probably run enough events that you don't have to, have a summer trip or a winter trip or have two locations to operate from. If you're a field trial trainer and going to do field trials, you almost have to have a winter and a summer location. The events, in order to run enough events, if you want to try and qualify dogs for the national, you know, there just aren't enough events in the South to only run in the winter, or there's not enough events in the North to only run in the summer. And really, you know, to train year round for major competitions, you really need good grounds and decent weather to train in. So that's sort of, you know, when you're competitive one against the other, you know, there's the quality of the dog, there's the quality of the trainer, but there's also the quality of the training ground. And you can't do great training on marginal grounds, or if it's, you know, if you got a foot of snow, you can't just, you can't train. So it's really important. Someone's thinking about training. If you want to field trial train, you know, you're going to travel. You're going to have that winter trip or summer trip. It's a lot of travel to events. You know, I used to run pretty much 24 trials a year, but then you'd be gone for 2 weeks at the National Open, you know, a week ahead to train, and then the week of the event. And then you've got the 2 weeks for the National Amateur, a week of training ahead of the event, and then a week of, you know, training during the event. So, you know, it's a lot of time on the road. It's definitely a lifestyle as opposed to an occupation.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And one question on that, what you were saying, like when you say, you know, good training grounds, like what would you consider like a good training grounds? Are you talking like, you know, a couple acres of open fields with a transition to water, and, you know, what would that kind of look like?
Absolutely. So it's different in sort of different areas, but varying terrain. So, you know, I think about, you know, I mostly was out west and down south in Texas. So you had big open landscapes, you know, in Montana. You could easily run, you know, 400 or 500 yards for a marked retrieve or blind at a long distance. Some areas were flat, some were hilly, some were different types of terrain. So, you know, some would be naturally manicured grass, but others could be cattails or sagebrush. You know, I used to go run trials in, well, they used to have some in Nevada. I think they've started again, but it was all running through sagebrush. And if you didn't train in sagebrush, if your dog had no exposure to sagebrush, they would go out there and get completely lost. And the local dogs would, you know, eat it up. So you'd have to vary your grounds on where you train to prepare the dog for the event. So again, you know, like Montana, big, wide open landscapes. And then before the national, if it was in, let's say, Vermont or New York or even Michigan, much smaller fields, more trees, more tree line type marks. So really a different look for the dog. So and water's the same way. So sometimes you want looks at big water. So like you'd use a small piece of a big lake. And then other times you want small pieces of what they call technical water, where there's lots of land water interfaces where the dog, you know, can do re-entries over spits and islands and points. And it's kind of a little more technical training type water. So, yeah, the dogs to be competitive, they need exposure to all of that type of different stuff.
So just diverse landscapes for these dogs to be familiar.
Absolutely. Yeah. I never had, I never got to hunt flooded timber or train in flooded timber for most years. And then I started getting some invites to go hunting in flooded timber. And I mean, that's another one, totally a different thing that a dog needs to learn, you know, to be on a stand on a tree. And, you know, it's just a different environment. So I think that exposure to all those types of things is critical for the dogs.
Yeah, I know lots of dogs who are really good dogs, but can't hunt flooded timber. And they're just pretty much left at home because, you know, right. It's just, they can't see and they're not familiar. And it's just a disaster for some of them sometimes. It's interesting to see these really, really great dogs not be able to perform in timber. And a lot of that is just, you know, the trainer or the owner never really planned on hunting them in that. And when you take a dog and just throw them into a different habitat like that, it can spell disaster if they're not familiar with it.
Absolutely. You know, and duck blinds is another thing that, you know, like a field trial dog is never really taught to hunt out of a duck blind or what that's like. You know, if you think about it, you know, depending on the situation, but in a lot of duck blinds, a dog has maybe 180 degree view. Mm-hmm. And, you know, maybe, right? And the birds are shot in every direction. So the dogs really have to learn, you know, a lot of those are blind retrieves, but the dogs are savvy. I mean, they learn to listen for the splash of the ducks hitting the water. And, you know, it's really unique. And I do want to say too, though, that, there's this misnomer that, field trial dogs are too amped up to be good hunting dogs. They whine and they're too much anxiety. And while I won't say that none of them are that way, I've hunted over some field champions that were just awesome, in the blind, quiet, calm, easygoing. Likewise, I've hunted over dogs that had no credentials, and some were good and some were terrible, so I think it really just depends on the exposure in the dog. And, I think if you look at a lot of the quality hunting dogs, even the quality hunt test dogs, those dogs come from field trial bloodlines typically.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, after, 25 plus years of being a field trial trainer, what would you say to your younger self, like when you were first getting started? What would be the one piece of advice that you would tell yourself that someone who may be interested in getting into it could really use that kind of sage advice?
Wow, that's like a trick question. I don't know. I guess I'll say my view on life is I try and plan and set goals and go for things, but then adjust as opportunities and needs arise. So I'm always open-minded to things. I never would have thought I would have ended up at Purina. I just wouldn't have imagined that. But I love what I do now. I loved training dogs when I did that as well. And I still mess around training dogs. I've actually got, I've had a couple border collies lately, and I've been playing with some sheepdog trials and doing something different just because I always love to learn new things with dogs. But, I was talking to my wife yesterday about the natural evolution of trainers, and it's really fun to watch, and the younger trainers, they come out and they want to win. They want to title dogs, whether it's hunt tests or field trials, and kind of prove their ability. And it's human nature. It's a competitive sport. And then you watch this transition as people are in the game longer and longer. It becomes more important that they see success with their amateurs. That the real joy, the greatest accomplishment is not just seeing a dog that you trained go do well, but actually seeing someone that you trained go do well. And it's I think it's the steps like that, you go through as a hunter as well. I mean, as you start hunting, you kind of go from that wanting to, shoot and kill to really more enjoying the hunt. And then later in life, you enjoy passing it along, and I think that's a great transition for people. It's a great curve. And that's when people really give back. There's the old saying, there's givers and takers in this world. And the longer people stay in something, the more they become a giver typically.
Yeah. And I think, you hit the nail on the head there. We talk about that a lot here, even on the DU podcast, is that transition from the younger hunter who's really out there to fill, to put ducks on the strap. And as you get older, you progress through that. And then there's a lot of guys who are just going to go and enjoy the kind of the camaraderie and the birds and the blind. And there's just so much more to it as you get older and you kind of transition into that giving back stage, I guess. And that's a big part of DU. So
absolutely,
that's a pretty strong message we just got out there, kind of circle of life. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah. And then there's the dog. That's what makes it fun, I don't even, I don't think if somebody said, "Hey, you want to go hunting, but we can't take a dog," or whatever, I'd think, I don't need to shoot anything that bad that I can't take a dog,
Yeah, no, there's a lot of people like that. And, it's kind of, even just personally, it's been kind of killing me the last couple of years not having a dog to hunt with.
We need to fix that.
I know. My wife's saying the same thing. So hope you don't have her number to call her, and she'll find a way to get a dog pretty quick. Fortunately, there's a couple guys who I hunt with all the time who have some really good dogs who kind of fill that void. And I've enjoyed their company, almost as much as I enjoy just having my dog around. So that's kind of helped it out, helped me stay, just a couple more years before I get another one. But I think the time might be coming.
Yeah.
Well, Karl, this has been fantastic. It's been a great conversation. I think we really got to highlight, the benefits of the partnership between Purina and Ducks Unlimited, but also got to chit chat about some field trials, some training information, and maybe even steered some wannabe field trial trainers in that direction, or steered them away one way or the other. I'm not sure.
Yeah, right.
But I do appreciate Yep. I appreciate you coming on. This is fantastic, and we'll have to get you back on again sometime soon.
Anytime, Chris. I enjoyed it, and thanks for all you do and the DU team. You know, I know so often it doesn't go unsaid, but it's a passion for you guys too, and nobody that's working at DU is doing it for the paycheck. They're doing it because they love what they do. They love the ducks, giving back, conservation, and so thanks to you and the DU team.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karl.
All right. Well, have a great day. Thanks, Chris.
I'd like to thank my guest, Karl Gunzer, the Director of Sporting Dog Group for Purina Pro Plan. I'd also like to thank our producer, Chris Isaac, for putting the show together and getting it out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us on the DU podcast and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.